I'm Elizabeth Noble with That's So Noble. In this video, we're going to talk about how to use Azure DevOps to automatically build your database projects. Let's get started. I've opened up Azure Data Studio and I'm connecting to my local SQL Server. If I expand databases and go to the database book catalog, I see that I have 4 tables. What's happened is the table book has been deleted. What we're going to use is Azure DevOps to build our database project and then deploy that database project to this server. So by the end of this video, we will, just using entirely Azure DevOps, have this database updated so that the table DBO book appears once again. Going into Azure DevOps, I have a fairly new account. I've already created an organization, but I haven't created a project. So I'm going to create the project book catalog, and I'm going to set this project to public since I'm doing a series of YouTube videos on this project, and create project. It's going to take a few minutes for Azure DevOps to get that configured, and then I'm going to go over to the left-hand side under book catalog. There's an option for pipelines, and then inside of pipelines, there's an option for pipelines. I'm going to go ahead and choose that. It's going to help me create a build pipeline. So I'm going to choose create pipeline. I'm going to select GitHub as the location where my code is stored. And then it's going to give me an option. It already has my database source control from GitHub connected. So I'm going to go ahead and select database project book catalog. Once I do that, Azure DevOps is going to redirect me to GitHub. And essentially the purpose of this is down below, if you scroll down, it has this suggested option to choose the database project book catalog to approve and install for Azure Pipeline. Once I'm back in Azure DevOps, I have the option to either use a starter pipeline or an existing Azure pipeline with a YAML file. We don't have a YAML file, so I'm going to start with the starter pipeline. By default, it creates a trigger on main. It also has a VM image. It's currently for Ubuntu, but I'm going to select Windows. That's mostly because that's what my company is accustomed to doing since we are a Windows shop. And I'm going to delete the items under steps and then going to show assistant. I'm going to select show assistant and type in visual for Visual Studio build. And one of the things that's going to be different here is that since I created this database project in Azure Data Studio, there is no solution file, so I need to use the SQL project file. So once I change this to .sqlproj instead of .sln, that is all I need to do to get this project to build. So now I have the option to save and run. When I select save and run, I also have the option to create a new branch. This will be a branch created off of our main branch. And there's a default name of Azure Pipelines. It also allows me to start a pull request, but I'm not finished with all my changes yet, so I'm just going to deselect that and do save and run. And what I'm checking here is I'm checking to make sure that my build process is actually working as expected. So one of the challenges sometimes with these YAML files is that you create a bunch of changes and then you try to run all of those changes, and it's difficult to determine what has actually happened or why it's failing. So I'm just kind of breaking these parts into separate pieces so that we can easily troubleshoot if there's an issue. So right now I've kicked off a job for the build pipeline, and it's currently telling me that it's waiting to go ahead and process that build process. We are using the free build minutes, so sometimes I have found that this tends to not be the most instantaneous process. Once it goes through the preparation phase, it goes through the VS build phase. And we're just looking to make sure that this project is going to build without any errors. once the project builds, it'll have some cleanup steps and then it'll tell us that it's finished. We've successfully built our database project from GitHub. That's really all you need to do to build a database project. However, we're going to move forward with the next steps of deploying that database project as well. So we're going to go back into the pipeline, and the next step we're going to do is we are going to copy files. We're doing this so that we can go ahead and have the artifacts available as part of the release pipeline. So I'm going to copy the source folder and the target folder and add that step to our pipeline. And then for the sake of time, I'm going to go ahead and do the next step as well, which has to do with the artifacts. And we are going to publish artifacts. We're going to give it the artifact name of book catalog. And we're going to use the default publish path. And then if we save these changes, we're going to save these changes to the Azure Pipelines branch. This will not automatically kick off a deployment, so we'll need to go ahead and run this. We'll run this pipeline one more time and make sure that the job completes successfully. The job's initializing, and then it'll go through the rest of its steps. So we're getting those checkout steps running, then it'll build. Afterwards, it'll copy the files and then publish those to the artifacts. So it's at the last step of artifacts where it's going to upload those. And now it's finished. So we've completed our build pipeline. I have previously set up my deployment group. That's something you'll want to figure out before you go through this next process. However, we're going to create our release pipeline. I'm going to select new pipeline. I'm also going to select empty job. You can use the IIS website and SQL database deployment. However, that's not the method I'm going to use today. So I'm going to change my stage name to database deploy. I'm going to close out of that window. And before I get any further, I'm going to change my release name to book catalog deploy. And then I'm going to tie this release pipeline to the artifacts that I created in the previous build process. So I'm just going to go ahead and select that source build pipeline and select add. And now I'm going to go back to the stage database deploy. Now by default it adds this agent job deployment method, but we're going to get rid of that and we're going to implement the deployment group. As I said, I've previously created a deployment group. You'll want to do that on your own. And I've just selected it from the drop-down window. I don't need any of the required flags, so we're just good to go with this as it is. And then when I select SQL, there's actually quite a few options. I personally use the SQL Server Database Deploy. This is how you're going to deploy to databases that are, not necessarily in Azure. There are other methods to deploy databases, but most of our databases are still on virtual machines that are not in a cloud service provider. So that's what I'm going to use today. And then it tells me I need to configure some additional information. So under the DACPack file, I have my linked artifacts and I can navigate from the build pipeline SQL Zelda database project book catalog to the subfolder book catalog to then to bin to debug and then select database project book catalog and OK. And then my database name is book catalog. and I can save this release pipeline. And then I'm going to select create release. And this is going to kick off a manual release. So it's going to take everything that was in the build that was part of that pipeline, and it's going to go ahead and release it. And if I click on the upper left-hand corner, it tells me that my release is in progress. And I can click on deployment in progress, and then it gives me kind of this nice window of succeeded versus failed, but I only have one step. So I'm going to click on that step in progress. And currently that step is working to initialize a job. Once it does that, it's going to move through the next couple of steps as part of automating that deployment process. So you can see it's already downloaded the artifact, and now it is moving on to deploying using the DAC pack. So the DAC pack is for a database tier application, and what it's going to do is it's going to take the DAC pack file, which was generated from source control, and compare it to the server we're deploying to, and then deploy whatever is different. So in our case, we are missing the table book. So at the end of this deployment, the table book should once again be deployed to my local host server after it's finished all of these steps. And there we go, it's finished deploying. So now to finish out this video, we're going to open up Azure Data Studio again, and I'm going to click refresh on the tables. And as you can see, that table DBO book has now been deployed. So that is end-to-end how you can build your database project from GitHub, and that's any form of GitHub, whether it's Azure Data Studio or Visual Studio. How you can build that database project and then automatically deploy it in Azure DevOps.